thick of it.
I hear the weather is miserable also.
Well, that's another good reason not to be there.
My wife is there.
Oh, is she?
And not The Hague, she went to Amsterdam. We had this plan where
Right.
we were both gonna go to The Hague,
Oh.
and then she was gonna spend a week with friends that we have in Amsterdam.
Oh, okay.
I was gonna come back.
So are you gonna be able to go over and join her?
No.
Well, you gotta tell them that. I came here instead of going to The Hague.
I think I'll pass on that.
Is that a Ustream?
Yeah, so if you go to the Ways and Means website, there's a live stream there, and then probably after the hearing, the video will be archived.
Oh,
So everyone should be able to.
yeah.
Oh, no worries, it's Ways and Means at house.gov.
Okay. Yeah, it's the thing is Ustream.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Hey, whatever.
So the gavel will drop, and then he'll set his opening statement. And then 5.5, we'll start talking about the intro action.
My guess is Johnson, because his statement, he talks about the number of workers per retiree.
Gotcha.
And he says actually it gets less than two. Wasn't
Said
aware
it
that
2
it got
point
less than
Yeah.
two.
I sent it to you something, it was from Sarah
Oh,
Stewart,
okay, got it.
and then I will put it back, I
Oh,
promise.
no worries, yeah, I was like, I'll go like this with it.
Every time I tell him, like,
Social Security versus CEO pay.
I always say that, every time, he takes it home with him.
Is that really?
And I should
Big old fly in here.
No worries, yeah. Just let me know when you're done and I'll put it back.
Yeah.
What's wrong?
I'm getting the webcast link out to the Social Security.
Yeah, so we'll just have them, but we have.
Okay.
No problem.
Sure.
In fact, Corey wouldn't let us tell anybody that, including like her parents, until after the fact. Okay, now it's safe.
Yeah.
And then, whenever all the staffers will
Hey,
eventually.
you can send it to all my family if you want.
Yeah, that's fine.
Come on up.
I know they'd love to see it.
It'll be there for posterity. Don't worry.
Videos.
It'll be on your permanent record.
And then just be right after.
You're right, not many windows in this room.
In some ways, this, probably never saw the House Rules Committee, but it's even smaller than this. And if it's at all possible, this dynamic is even worse. They're slightly higher, but you're slightly closer. So it's actually members of Congress that typically testify before them when they go in there, and it's like, they look down on you.
Show who has power.
Right.
How the house works.
Yeah. It's a nice thing though, it's a discussion here, it's like you're so close. The, Corey testified in the full committee of Energy and Commerce, which is like a cavern. It's like Ways and Means, only long and cavernous instead of deep and cavernous. And when you couldn't really hear, the acoustics were so bad talking into the microphone. I think they could hear up in the days, you really couldn't hear what anybody was saying.
There you go.
It's weird.
That should be fine. If you wanna, take a seat and, I'll test out the mic if you'd like.
What is the order going to be?
So it'll start with Ed over here and then just work your way down. So you'll be
Right in the middle.
Thanks.
And you're just gonna just press the button, and that'll turn the mic on.
What button?
It's just right here.
The one that says push.
Oh. Hello.
Oh, thanks. Okay, great. Yeah, and then when you're done, just turn it off.
Jason Fisher.
Hi, nice to meet you. What else is here? This is so heavy. No, I think that's okay. Yeah, apparently we're gonna go in order. It's like ding, 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 ding. Oh, hey, do you want a copy of my oral testimony for the heck of it?
I was gonna say I have it on my phone, but yeah. Oh, Ellie has it also, so she can quickly pull pieces.
Oh, cool.
Yeah,
That's
I
so
said-
cool. I'm glad I sent her. I'm glad I sent you guys your phone. I hope. Oh, God, there's water. Hey, so what's the little Twitter? Oh, Ellie will figure it out.
I'm not sure. Oh, yeah.
No, it's okay. I wish I had asked. I have a coalition, but I should. You know what? Let me email the guy in the coalition and ask him if there's a certain Twitter thing that all the Social Security people will follow.
Yeah, I don't. I've never done this with it before, so I don't know.
Have you guys? Yeah. Did you guys tweet where you do? Oh yeah. You'll learn. There's just like little hashtags.
It would be up to the client's communications person.
Ellie will have stuff for our followers, but I was just. It's something that I forgot to do yesterday. But that's okay.
Gene, you're there.
We'll have you right here. I'm gonna go around this way.
My bag. Yes.
So do you need to pass it? Do you need me to look anything up?
You're just gonna press the button.
How's on? Okay, testing 1, 2, 3.
Great, and then turn it off. You just press it back.
Yeah.
There we go. Alright, good to go.
How's life? How's life?
Very busy. I was up at a conference at Princeton yesterday. Actually, I was on with the health cost. It's fairly good conference.
You think it's a
Do
temporary?
you know Stu Altman?
Mhm.
Can you answer?
You think it's a temporary blip for the?
Huh?
Do you think the cost controls are a temporary blip in the slowing of growth, or is it gonna?
So my thesis was, I said, what happens when an irresistible force, which is I consider the current design of health insurance, when you and I go to the doctor and Barbara and everybody has to pay, which means that can't possibly, as long as you have that in place, there's no way to get the system under control. But then I said, what happens when it meets an increasingly immovable object, which is starts absorbing more and more of all the income growth in the economy. And so I think, and actually I showed a relationship that GDP growth is lower and the base on which you're building is higher. There's almost a natural tendency for what they're measuring as excess costs, they measure it as percent above GDP, that slows down. That is, you could keep absorbing, say, 40% of income growth without any slowdown, but you would end up seeing that number they measure as excess will slow down. So we'll give you a simple example. If you're a tiny percent of GDP and you grow 10% faster than GDP, you're still absorbing
Well, I
almost
think too,
nothing.
when you start looking at the idea of this average cost growth and what is excess cost, I've always love the term excess cost growth. Because if you have an average, something has to be above and below the average, hence the definition.
So my thesis is the wrong variable. We should be looking at the percent of income that health is absorbing. And you know, that will asymptotically approach something, maybe it's 100, but whereas the excess cost growth, by its very nature, it should slow down even if healthcare is not slowing down in the income that's absorbing. And so that was my thesis. I showed them that calculations. But other people were arguing about, you know, drug companies have mandated blockbuster drugs, so that means it's slow down. That's their percentage.
Please stand on this side of the camera. So Don will just be addressing towards her. Sir, if you're one of the witnesses, could you sit down for me? Okay. I'm not too sure. Are you one of them?
Yeah, I can sit down.
Okay. Are you one of the witnesses? Yes. Thank you, ma'am, and your okay.
Good?
I'm good, thank you. Turn back on.
Let me turn us on there. Workers have earned the right to secure retirement that no one can take away. Yet, unless Congress acts to protect and preserve Social Security, beginning in 2033, Social Security will be unable to pay full benefits according to the Board of Trustees. Here's why Social Security has to be fixed. Under Social Security, workers' payroll taxes aren't saved in the worker's own retirement account. Instead, their taxes are immediately used to pay benefits for today's retirees. This kind of system works when many people paying in and very few collecting benefits. In the 50s, for instance, there were 16 workers paying for each retiree collecting benefits. But today, families are having fewer children and people are living longer. As a result, even though the number of workers is growing, the number of retirees is growing much faster. Today, there are just over 3 workers supporting each retiree. In the future, there will be less than 2. Back in 2008, the first baby boomers started collecting retirement benefits. Costs rose quickly, and 2 years later, in 2010, Social Security began running permanent cash flow deficits, reaching $1.3 trillion over the next 10 years. And those deficits will grow larger and very fast. When today's 47-year-old workers reach their full retirement age in 2033, they and everyone else already receiving benefits face a 25% cut unless Congress does its job. Fixing Social Security is a serious challenge. If we wait, it will become a crisis. The sooner we act, the sooner changes can be phased in gradually. Over a number of years, if we fail to act, future generations will be faced with changes that are sudden and even larger. Today, our witnesses include representatives from 2 bipartisan groups who have taken a hard look at Social Security and come up with ways to fix it. It wasn't easy work, but they know we can't afford to wait. Their 2 plans have a lot in common. They would slow the growth of benefits for higher earners, take into account the fact people are living longer, and make important changes to improve benefits for some of those poorly served by the current system. Since these plans were written, Social Security's 10-year cash flow deficit has increased by over 450%. Across-the-board cuts will occur 7 years sooner, and Social Security's long-term shortfall is almost 60% larger. It's unfair and wrong to leave with our kids and grandkids a Social Security system that can't pay full promised benefits. The good work of Simpson Bowles and the Bipartisan Policy Center Debt Reduction Task Force shows us there are bipartisan solutions to fix Social Security. And as I've said before, the president likes to say if we agree on a policy, then we should act and not let our differences hold us up. Today, we will again carry out our responsibility to every American to closely examine each bipartisan policy option. When we agree, we ought to act, and we will. I now recognize the ranking member, Mr. Becerra, for any opening statement you care to make.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I think we can all agree on some basics. First, Social Security has never contributed a penny to our current deficit or to our national debt. So any changes to Social Security should be solely to address its long-term challenges and not to make Social Security pay for the debts run up by tax cuts for the rich or 2 unpaid-for wars. Second, Americans support Social Security. They've earned it through their weekly payroll contributions, and they're counting on their elected representatives to protect it as well. And finally, at least for me, the America I grew up knowing and loving has always risen to the challenge of building a better place for our children, providing for that in any way possible, whether that means college, a strong and secure nation, or Social Security once we retire. We build, we don't tear down in America. And so here we go. Social Security has never contributed a penny to our current deficit or debt. I want to emphasize that. Social Security today has $2.7 trillion in Treasury certificates that have never been used and are available for those who need retirement, to go into retirement, are disabled, or if you happen to have lost your parent who was a worker, you then as a survivor get to receive Social Security benefits. 2.7 trillion. And I'd like to show a chart at this stage that I think proves that Americans not only have supported Social Security, but continue to support Social Security today, overwhelmingly. And they're counting on their elected representatives to protect Social Security. As you can see from the chart, even though lots of folks have heard a lot of scare talk about Social Security being bankrupt or going under, and sometimes Americans' confidence may fluctuate, the reality is this, as this chart shows, Social Security has always had the confidence of the American public. How many people in America think Social Security spends about the right amount, or maybe it doesn't give quite enough in its benefits? Well, that's always hovered somewhere around 89% of Americans who think it's too little or about right. Less than 10% of Americans since 1984 have said that Social Security pays out too much, that it's too generous. And so support for Social Security is strong. The vast majority of Americans are there. A recent poll by the National Academy of Social Insurance found that 74% of Republicans and 77% of people born after 1980 said they wanted to preserve Social Security, even if it meant working people would have to pay a little more in taxes. Now, the America I know can and will rise to this challenge of meeting Social Security's future challenges. There's no question that Social Security will need to make some changes to ensure its future that is vibrant. But in the America I know, we wouldn't start by planning to cut benefits for seniors, disabled workers, and children who've lost their parent. America's workers deserve much better than that. The vast majority of Social Security recipients, both today and in the future, have very modest incomes and few resources. For 6 out of 10 retirees in our country, Social Security provides the majority of their income. There are some who seem to suggest that deep Social Security cuts are inevitable, so we should just make them now. That to me is discouraging, and that's certainly not the America I grew up in. To give up and to say that we can't assure a measure of dignity to those who have worked hard all their lives, paid into Social Security, and we're planning on it for retirement, we have no choice? No. Let me show you a different chart. Here's the average benefit on the far right that you see that Americans earn from Social Security. On average, about $14,000 for a retiree comes from Social Security, and a little less if you're a disabled worker. Now, that's quite a bit less than what the average worker today makes, which is about $50,000, as you see on the chart. But then look at the most fortunate in our country, the most well-off people in society. The top 1% of workers earned 5 times as much as the average worker in America and 18 times as much as the average Social Security beneficiary who is retired. When you get to the stratosphere, the top 1/10 of 1%, they made an average of 41 times what the typical Social Security retiree gets. And if you look all the way to the left, you see what an average CEO in America would make. About $12 million in 2011, on average. On average. That is 869 times what the average retiree receives from Social Security. So I ask you, where should we start as we think about how to address Social Security's challenges in the future? Should we take it from the Social Security beneficiaries' modest checks, or should we look to those most fortunate and see if they can contribute a little bit more? Should we ask the widow to give up her modest benefit, or ask the CEO to pitch in a little bit more? Social Security will face a challenge, there's no doubt. But in America, at least the America I know and love, we can rise to this challenge. And so, Mr. Chairman, I'm looking forward to this hearing. I think we need a lot. We can learn a lot from the witnesses who are here, and we need to listen quite a bit. So I'm anxious to hear their testimony, and I yield back the balance
Thank you.
of my
The
time.
gentleman's time has expired. I'd like to just state that Congress has been raising taxes on workers since the beginning of the program, and it still hasn't worked. In 35, the tax rate for employers and employees was just 1% on earnings. Up to $3,000 a year, Congress has raised the payroll tax rate 14 times since then. As is customary, any member is welcome to submit a statement for the hearing record. And before we move on to our testimony, I want to remind our witnesses to please limit your statements to 5 minutes. However, without objection, all of the written testimony will be made a part of the hearing record. We have one witness panel today, one of whom is stuck in traffic, as I was this morning, so I understand that. G. William Hoagland, Senior Vice President, Bipartisan Policy Center. Jason Fichtner, a PhD, Senior Research Fellow with Mercatus Center. Leticia Miranda, Senior Policy Advisor of the Economic Security Policy National Council of La Raza. Donald First, Senior Pension Fellow, American Academy of Actuaries. And Eugene Sterling, PhD, Institute Fellow, Urban Institute. And Mr. Lewinson isn't here, so Mr. Hoagland, I'm going to recognize you. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Becerra, members of the committee, thank you for inviting me here today to discuss the recommendations to the Social Security program made by the Bipartisan Policy Center's Domenici-Rivlin Debt Reduction Task Force. I was privileged to serve on that bipartisan group that released its recommendations in November of 2010. Our report came out about the same time as the President's National Commission on Fiscal Responsibility and Reform, upon which Dr. Rivlin also served, along with Mr. Becerra. The Domenici-Rivlin report was designed as a total plan of policies to spur economic recovery and to reduce our debt to GDP down to our goal then was 60% by the year 2020. But as we examined the various options to address Social Security program, the overarching question was not how do we produce savings for the program, but rather more how can we improve the current system and make it fair and ensure that it's a viable program around for decades to come. Our benefit recommendations were four. The first was indexing the Social Security benefit formula to account for longevity. The second was to increase the progressivity of the benefit formula. The third was to provide a more robust minimum benefit. And the fourth was to implement a benefit bump up for older beneficiaries. Now, related to the first recommendation on indexing of longevity, the biggest issue confronting Social Security today, and of course it is due to demographics. As the large cohort of baby boomers, of which I am one, retire, we will collect benefits for longer than previous age cohorts. Our task force felt that any viable reform package must confront this trend head on. We also understood that certain individuals, particularly those working in hard industries such as mining, fisheries, loggers, firefighters, steel mills, among others, they may want and they may need to take early retirement at age 62, unlike those of us who work for soft think tanks. Therefore, beginning in 2023, instead of indexing both the early and the normal retirement age to longevity, meaning that they would increase by 1 month every 2 years, we propose to index the benefit formula for increases in life expectancy. This would ensure that those seniors who could not remain in the labor force well into their 60s would retain the option to begin collecting reduced benefits at age 62. Now, specifically, the provision would index the bin points to longevity by reducing those factors starting in 2023 to reflect the ratio of the life expectancy at 67 measured in 2018 to the life expectancy at 67 for 4 years before the initial benefit eligibility. This change in life expectancy is estimated today to reduce the benefit levels by about 0.3% a year. And this policy of indexing the benefit formula to longevity comprised nearly half of the savings achieved by the plan to get to actuarial balance. The second recommendation was a modest increase in the progressivity of the benefit formula. Currently, as you know, monthly wages above roughly $4,800, the topmost bin point, are replaced at 15%. We recommended gradually phasing that down over a decade to 10%. The third recommendation related to the minimum benefit. Our task force proposed to provide a special minimum benefit tied to 133% of the federal poverty level for retirees who have at least 30 years of credible work. Fourth, we similarly agreed to the importance of providing some protection to beneficiaries from the danger of outliving their savings, and to address this, we suggested a benefit bump of 1% of the average monthly Social Security benefit to be administered each year between the ages of 81 and 85. And these two proposals, the minimum benefit and the old age bump up, would be integral to one of the task force's other proposals. I realize not the purpose of this hearing, and that was indexing the cost of living adjustment to the chain-weighted price index. Further, Beginning in 2020, the task force also proposed that newly hired state and local government workers be incorporated into the program. Finally, through, again, and a subject for another day, our total package recommended restoring the taxable maximum to cover 90% of all earnings. And as part of our task force broader tax reform, we propose to cap and phase out the exclusion of employer-provided health insurance, which would bring additional payroll receipts into the trust fund. The Domenici-Rivlin Task Force members concluded that this package would accomplish sustainable solvency, and it was verified by the Chief Actuary of Social Security. It would do this in a progressive manner, protecting vulnerable beneficiaries and distributing the burden in an even-handed and responsible manner among taxpayers and retirees, while assuring Social Security will be there for our children and our grandchildren in the years to come. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I appreciate your comments. Mr. Fichtner, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, sir. Good morning, Chairman Johnson, Ranking Member Becerra, and members of the committee. Thank you for inviting me to testify here today. Oh, it's on. It's not close enough. Sorry. My name is Jason Fichtner, and I'm a senior research fellow at the Mercatus Center at George Mason University, where I research fiscal and budgetary issues, including Social Security. I am also an adjunct professor at Georgetown University, Johns Hopkins University, and Virginia Tech, where I teach courses in economics and public policy. All opinions here today are my own, do not necessarily reflect the views of my employers. For my oral remarks, I want to briefly discuss how various features of Social Security, from the technical details of the benefit formula to the benefit eligibility at age 62, to the non-working spouse benefit, all act to encourage early retirement and as a disincentive to continued work. Most analyses of Social Security have concluded that its current design offers substantially negative incentives for work, especially for younger seniors and for secondary household earners. Research has found that Social Security's return on payroll tax contributions by those aged 62 to 65 is a negative 49.5%, meaning that the program literally pays back just pennies in additional benefits for each additional dollar contributed. Other research has found that the broader array of federal laws strongly inhibits continued work by seniors, with disincentives growing stronger as they age. It is notable that labor force participation did not decline for those younger than 65 until Social Security's early eligibility age of 62 was established. After the creation of the EEA, labor force participation by males aged 55 to 64 also began to trend downward, dropping over 20% from 87.3% in 1960 to 67.7% in 1990. Workforce participation trends among older workers are not driven primarily by issues of physical incapacity. Labor force participation among males over 65 was much higher in the mid-20th century than it is now, despite substantial gains in national health and longevity since then. Incentives have played a much greater role. The design of the basic Social Security benefit formula imposes net incremental income losses on those extending their careers. The primary reason for the work disincentive is that Social Security benefit formula is progressive, while also based on a worker's top 35 years of earnings on average. Indeed, someone who takes a part-time transition job on the way to full retirement may well pay a full year's worth of additional taxes while receiving no additional benefit credits whatsoever. This is a substantial work disincentive at precisely the time when a worker is likely to make a retirement decision. Social Security's early retirement age of 62 is actually the most common age of benefit claiming. In fact, over 70% of beneficiaries take advantage of the opportunity to claim Social Security retirement benefits before the normal retirement age, despite receiving lower monthly benefits by doing so. Early retirement is only certain to make beneficiaries better off in the short run. The reduction of monthly benefits that accompanies early claims also results in net lifetime benefit reductions for those who live to especially advanced ages, often a time in life when beneficiaries are most likely to rely on Social Security benefits to pay their expenses. Also, Social Security specifically provides a disincentive to tax-paying work by more than one earner per household. Incremental returns on taxes paid by women have been estimated at negative 32% relative to what they would receive by staying out of the paid workforce altogether and instead often collecting the non-working spouse benefit. As a general rule, Social Security aggressively redistributes income from two-earner married couples to one-earner married couples, penalizing a household decision to have both spouses work and contribute payroll taxes. A median-wage two-earner couple, both born in 1955, can expect to receive back only 80 cents from Social Security on each dollar contributed, whereas a one-earner couple can expect to receive $1.39. Much of the original welfare system was designed to support single-earner families. Today, 61% of married women participate in the labor force compared to only 32% in 1960. Social Security needs to reflect the evolving workplace and not penalize two-earner couples. It is unsurprising that our future economic growth outlook is depressed by current projections for labor force participation, relative to what would be the case if more of our national gains in longevity and health were converted into longer periods of tax-paying work. Extending workforce participation would pay dividends for individual seniors and for the economy. With age 62 now the most popular age to claim benefits, raising the EEA would necessarily delay many claims and would likely correlate to continued employment. Research has estimated that raising the EEA to 65 would increase the long-run GDP by 3 or 4%. Another reform would be to offer the delayed retirement credits as a lump sum option, which could eventually provide an incentive to continued working without additional financing costs to the system. I would also point out that you could change the benefit formula from instead of being on 35 years of work history to looking at an average and doing it per year. This would help take care of complications caused by the windfall elimination provision and government pension offset. Others have suggested that we do payroll tax relief we offer to seniors. We should be careful if we do this, but the overall positive effects of such a policy can have on labor participation by seniors should not be dismissed. Thank you for your time and opportunity to testify today. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Lorenzen found his way through traffic, but I'm going to come back to you since we've already started. Ms. Miranda, you're welcome. Please go ahead.
Thank you for inviting me to speak with you today. I'm a senior policy advisor at NCLR. NCLR has been working to advance retirement security among Hispanic Americans for over a decade, and my work is centered on this topic. Social Security serves 56 million retirees, disabled adults, and survivors of deceased workers and their families. The focus of today's hearing is to discuss options to strengthen Social Security so that this critical program can continue providing benefits into the future. In this regard, I want to make 3 key points. First, Social Security benefits are modest yet critical to most seniors, especially because pensions are becoming weaker. Second, the proposed benefit cuts will cause deep harm to a vast majority of seniors. Third, we need meaningful benefit enhancements for the most vulnerable. I will close my remarks with some principles for reform. First, Social Security provides modest benefits that are very important to those who receive them. The average Social Security retiree benefit last year was approximately $14,800. Seniors rely heavily on their benefits. 2/3 of beneficiaries rely on Social Security for at least 50% of their income, and 1/3 rely on it for almost all of their income. Among seniors of color, 55% of Hispanics, 49% of African Americans, and 42% of Asians rely on Social Security for almost all of their income. Low-income workers face inadequate benefits. Social Security replaces only 40% of prior earnings for low-income workers who retire at age 62. Pension coverage is getting weaker. Pension coverage among private sector workers has fallen from 50% in 1979 to 42% now. American men have lost the most ground over this time period. The quality of pension coverage has also declined. Risky, inadequate 401k style plans have replaced more secure defined benefit plans, and Americans are not saving enough in their 401ks. More and more, the only stable form of retirement income that most people can count on is Social Security. Given all of this, our nation should not reduce Social Security benefits. Yet many ideas are being proposed to cut Social Security benefits. I will talk about 2 of these harmful proposals. First, the partial price indexing option deeply cuts benefits for seniors with already modest income. Under one PPI plan, the average monthly benefit would fall from $1,250 to less than $900 per month. Second, increasing the retirement age or enacting longevity indexing also cuts benefits for all workers, including those with the lowest incomes. Each 1-year increase in the statutory retirement age is equivalent to a benefit cut of approximately 7%. The most important problem with these proposed benefit cuts is that vulnerable people will be pushed into greater poverty and hunger. NCLR held 6 town halls with Latino seniors in 2011 to hear their views on Social Security's future. One senior in Los Angeles, who spoke from his wheelchair, said he lives alone on $750 per month, and he cannot afford to buy food after paying for rent and other bills. He relies on local food banks to survive. People like him cannot afford further reductions to their already inadequate benefits. Basic living expenses do not decline simply because the overall population is living longer. My third major point is that we do need benefit enhancements for the lowest income workers, but these need to be meaningful. Benefit increases that are only proposed to lessen the impact of a benefit cut do not constitute a benefit improvement. Neither does structuring a benefit improvement so that few people will qualify. Lastly, I offer a few principles to keep in mind as you approach reform. First, maintain what works with Social Security. For example, don't make it a means-tested program and keep it universal. Second, include revenue as part of the solution to get to long-term solvency. Americans will support this, as many surveys show. Revenue increases can make harmful benefit cuts unnecessary. Third, truly improve benefits so that low-income workers can retire with benefits that keep them out of poverty, and protect low and moderate income people from any benefit cuts. Thank you. I am happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Mr. First, you're welcomed here, and please go ahead.
Chairman Johnson, Ranking Member Becerra, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you to assist in your examination of bipartisan proposals to adjust Social Security benefits. I'm here on behalf of the American Academy of Actuaries, where I'm the Senior Pension Fellow. The Academy is the nonpartisan association representing all actuaries in the United States on public policy issues. My statement will focus on retirement age. Americans are living longer. Of particular relevance to Social Security, the life expectancy of the elderly is increasing. A longer life creates numerous benefits for individuals, but brings with it an expensive challenge: how to provide financial security for our seniors. Simply put, the longer someone lives, the more benefits Social Security must pay. Since 1940, the life expectancy of a 65-year-old has increased 6 years for both males and females, and we expect this trend to continue. An increase in longevity among the elderly without a corresponding change in the full retirement age actually constitutes an increase in lifetime benefits. Although the monthly amount a retiree receives is unchanged, the number of payments increases with longer lifespans. Raising the full retirement age addresses Social Security's long-range financial problems while responding to changing demographic factors. In particular, raising the full retirement age will compensate for increases in longevity, preserve the current benefit formula, increase labor force participation, and preserve disability benefits. The Academy supports retirement age changes, but does not advocate a specific proposal. An increase in the retirement age should not be the sole solution to the imbalance in the system. Potential methods for increasing the full retirement age include both fixed schedule and indexing methods. The Simpson-Bowles report includes a proposal to index both full and early retirement ages to increases in longevity, and a hardship exemption for workers who cannot continue working past age 62 but do not qualify for disability benefits. The Bipartisan Policy Center proposed adjusting benefits for longevity by decreasing the formula as people live longer. This method could produce the same benefit amounts as a change in the full retirement age. However, it does not deliver the same message to American workers as an increased retirement age, which signals workers that they can and should continue in the labor force. We recognize that there are obstacles to raising the full retirement age. This would have a disproportionate effect on low-wage workers because longevity increases are not uniform across all demographic groups. Additionally, jobs may not be readily available for all older workers. But there are targeted policy options that might address these problems, including liberalizing disability benefits for older workers, revising the early retirement factors to provide a lesser reduction on benefits below the first bend point, enhanced job training, and incentives for employers to hire and retain older workers. Raising the early eligibility age beyond 62 should also be considered to encourage individuals to work longer, to help avoid the problem of inadequate benefits caused by early retirement reduction. This would not significantly change Social Security's financial position. 44% of workers receive benefits at age 62, the most popular age for electing benefits, despite the larger benefits that are available at later ages. Retaining age 62 as the early retirement eligibility, or allowing partial benefits at age 62, is likely to result in many people selecting commencement at this early age, with a smaller benefit, which may prove to be inadequate. Estimates show that the proportion of jobs that are physically demanding has shrunk to less than 8% of our workforce, and less than 20% of workers who retire early do so for health reasons. The problems of these groups could be addressed by other programs, and Social Security benefits could be designed to provide adequate lifetime income at appropriate ages. In closing, I again thank the subcommittee for this opportunity. Addressing Social Security solvency now permits more modest changes that Congress could phase in over many years. This would ensure that the system will continue to provide retirement security for generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Sterling, welcome again. Please go ahead.
Chairman Johnson, members of the committee, subcommittee, thank you for this opportunity to testify before you. In my testimony, I provide a fairly lengthy set of proposals that follow principles that I believe apply to Social Security, but I don't want to spend my brief 5 minutes here talking about them so much as to make a pitch with you that we want to do Social Security benefit reform. That's the subject of this hearings, regardless of the level of taxes you collect, regardless of the imbalances of the system. And that's because Social Security has increasingly failed to target its money towards, I think, needs that we would all agree are most important, or even meet various principles such as equal justice under the law. So let me give an example just in terms of lifetime benefits. A newly retiring average wage couple today will receive about $580,000 in Social Security benefits. That's what they'd need in a bank account if it was to earn, which it won't earn today, but it would earn about 2% in real interest rates. And if you add in Medicare, they're scheduled to get about $1 million in Social Security and Medicare benefits. That largely derives from the large number of years of benefits that are paid. But even if we thought that that was some level we had to maintain, mind you that in the budget as a whole, we're now cutting benefits and other programs for children. We're cutting programs for middle income families. But in Social Security and Medicare, every year we bump up these lifetime benefits by about $20,000. So that if we take a couple retiring, say a couple that's in their 40s today, they're scheduled to get about $1.4 million in these Social Security and Medicare benefits versus the $1 million for the couple retiring today. That's where all the growth in government is going, even while we derail almost everything else that government is about. Now, there are other problems in Social Security. Social Security has really morphed into a middle-aged retirement system. Typical couples now retire for close to 3 decades in terms of getting benefits. That's the longer living of the two. If people are retired today for the same number of years as they did when physical demands of work were larger, that is the retirement age of 68 that they retired on average in 1940, today they'd be retiring at about age 76. Meanwhile, all this pushing of more and more benefits to younger and younger ages relative to death means that fewer benefits, a smaller and smaller share of benefits, are going to people who are truly old, which is the purpose of the program. And so soon, close to 1/3 of adults will be on Social Security, retiring on average for about 1/3 of their adult lives. Now, Social Security did do a good job in reducing poverty in its early years, but in recent years, despite spending hundreds of billions of dollars more every year, it's only made very modest progress on this front. Meanwhile, in the midst of a recession, when we're worried about the non-employment rate going up, the Social Security system encourages an increase in this non-employment rate at the very time when our older members of our society are perhaps the most underused source of human capital in our economy and group people that we should be encouraging to work. And then finally, along this long list of failures, the failure to provide equal justice just permeates the system. It discriminates against single heads of households, often abandoned mothers. It discriminates against spouses with relatively equal earnings. It discriminates against those who bear their children before age 40, which is where most people bear their children. It discriminates against long-term workers and many, many others, for which I provided detail. And then finally, as a couple other members of this panel have mentioned, the private retirement system also needs addressing because it leaves most elderly households very vulnerable. Unfortunately, the Social Security debate has largely proceeded on the basis of being for the box or against the box. We have to start to be for Social Security or against Social Security. The contents of the box, as I say, deserve scrutiny regardless of the size of the system overall. So how might one break through this stalemate in a political way? And while I applaud the efforts of the Simpson-Bowles Commission and the Bipartisan Policy Commission, I think we can go much further if we start with a basic set of principles and then just see where they lead us. Now, some changes, by the way, would lead to an increase in benefits. Some changes might lead to a decrease in benefits, but we don't want to decide them one at a time. We want to see how the aggregate pulls together. So inevitably balance, in my way, should proceed in the following order. So first, consider reforms aimed at meeting Social Security's primary purposes. Let's provide greater protections for those who are truly needy and for those who are truly owed. Let's support the work and saving base that's necessary to undergird the system and provide the taxes we need. That means we have to encourage work. And let's provide more equal justice for those suffering needless discrimination in the system. So some of, as I say, changes cost money, some raise money, but we shouldn't address them one at a time. After we do these changes, then we should come in and adjust minimum benefits even further. I have some suggestions in. Adjust the rate schedules, adjust the indexing of benefits, so then we hit our targets for distribution and our targets for final cost. Now, if you do what I say, we could work together across the aisle to fix up the system for the bottom half of the distribution and save, if you want to, that fight over whether higher income taxpayers are going to pay more taxes or they're going to get reduced benefits, which is where the fight really leads. So my testimony, as I say, provides a detailed way of engaging this type of reform process. It's largely the logic that I followed when I served as economic coordinator of the Tax Reform Act of '86. I get called to testify all the time on how did we get this to work. Well, we started off to see where our principles led us. Then we came back in. And adjusted things like rate schedules, minimum benefits, and things like that to hit our distributional and revenue targets. It's the same type of suggestion I made to the Simpson-Bowles Commission on taxes. So I'm finished. That's the end of my recommendations. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Lorenzen, thank you for braving the traffic in Washington today, and I had the same problem, so I understand it. Thank you. You're recognized.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee. It's a pleasure to be before you here again to talk about the recommendations in the final report of the Simpson-Bowles Commission regarding Social Security, particularly those regarding benefit formula and retirement age. I would also like to associate myself with all the comments of Mr. Sterling, whose advice and writings had a major impact on the work of the Commission, even if we were not as aggressive as he would like. The executive order that created the Fiscal Commission charged the Commission with two mandates: one, to identify policies to improve the fiscal situation in the medium term, but also to achieve fiscal sustainability over the long term. Commission members had differences of opinion of the role of Social Security in the medium-term fiscal outlook, but there was a general consensus among Commission members that meeting the mandate of improving the long-term fiscal sustainability required looking at the Social Security system and making the Social Security program sustainably solvent. Therefore, the recommendations did not count Social Security reform in meeting deficit reduction in the near term, but were important for our long-term recommendations. In the report, we outlined the approach that the Commission took this way. To save Social Security for the long haul, all of us must do our part. The most fortunate will have to contribute the most by taking lower benefits than scheduled and paying more in payroll taxes. Middle-income earners who are able to work will need to do so a little longer. At the same time, Social Security must do more to help reduce poverty among the very poor and the very old who need help the most. The provisions in the Commission's report directly affecting benefits, including changes in the benefit formula, retirement age, and cost of living adjustments, among other changes, were responsible for approximately 60% of the savings over 75 years, and the provisions related to revenues, increasing the taxable maximum faster than current law, and requiring state and local workers to pay into the system, were responsible for approximately 40% of the savings over 75 years. But if you look in the 75th year, the net increase in revenues would be sufficient to close just 22% of the shortfall in the 75th year. And that is why we felt it was necessary to include changes in the benefit formula and retirement age to make the program sustainably solvent. So the first area of benefit changes we recommended were gradually moving to a more progressive benefit formula, which would slow the benefit growth relative to current law, particularly for workers with incomes above the median. Specifically, the plan would gradually phase in changes in replacement rates of 90, 32, and 15% under current law to 90, 30, 10, and 5% by 2050, phased in over a 30-year period. The current 32% bracket would be split at the median income level and ultimately reduced to 30%. So there would be only a very modest change in the benefit formula for workers with incomes below the median level. Future retirees would receive higher benefits than can be provided under current law for most seniors, except for the highest earning workers. Because the bend point factors would continue to be wage indexed, full benefits would continue to grow faster than inflation for nearly all beneficiaries and grow nearly as fast as wages for those in the bottom 50% of the income distribution. One of the Commission's key principles was that Social Security must ensure the program will meet its basic mission to prevent people who can no longer work from falling into poverty. In order to achieve this goal, the Commission recommended creating a new minimum benefit which would provide stronger poverty protections than current law, including what current law under scheduled and payable benefits. The minimum benefit would provide a full career minimum wage worker with a benefit equal to 125% of poverty, and the minimum benefit would then be indexed to wages, which would provide substantially stronger poverty protection over time. Although the plan in the final report of the Commission would provide substantially higher benefits for most low-income workers, we did find that there were unintended consequences with a slight median reduction in the median benefit for workers in the bottom quintile, and the Commission co-chairs committed to the members of the Commission to identifying changes to address that concern. And we spent a great deal of time over the last couple of years looking at ways to tweak the minimum benefit and the benefit formula in order to do so. I've outlined those changes in my testimony, and would say that with those changes, we would have substantially stronger poverty protections than current law, and relative to payable benefits would have 50% reduction in poverty, and relative to scheduled benefits, a 10% reduction. One of the key lessons I also learned in this process was the importance of looking at workers with intermittent work histories who are most likely to fall short of the adequate benefits and not always protected by minimum benefit provisions. But in doing so, it's important to distinguish between those who truly are low-income workers and those who simply look like they're a low-income worker based on the Social Security income calculations, but in fact were relatively affluent because they had a great deal of earnings over the lifetime that were not covered by Social Security for working abroad, uncovered employment, and the like.
Can you close it down?
Certainly. And finally, we had increases in the retirement age. We indexed the retirement age to longevity, both the early retirement age and the normal retirement age. Under the current projections, would be growing by 1 month every 2 years. However, it would actually be based off of the increases in longevity. Therefore, if longevity is growing faster than currently projected, the age would increase more rapidly. But conversely, if the longevity grows more slowly, the retirement age would grow less aggressively.
Thank you. I'm going to do something a little different here. I appreciate the testimony of all of you, but I'm going to ask you this question. How soon should we act to fix Social Security? I'd like each one of you to tell me. Mr. Lorenzen? I would say that it is the sooner that Congress can act, the better it would be. And I can say this as someone who's been working on Social Security reform for much longer than I can admit, that each successive time I've gone through the process of looking at the options of what you have to do on benefits and on revenues and the level of benefits you can provide at a certain level of taxes, that the choices become substantially more difficult each time I've gone through this process. Now the question is, how soon should we start? And so I think it needs to be starting soon. I think we've already waited too long. Okay. Mr. Hoagland?
You should start now. I agree that you should not hold up on this exercise.
Mr. Fichtner?
Congressman, 10 years ago. In some ways, we're already too late. They're saying act now. We should have done this a long time ago. I used to go around saying that we could change benefits and hold current retirees harmless. We're getting closer to not being able to do that. So we're late, but definitely now.
Yeah, I agree with you. I've been on this committee a long time myself, and, you know, we can work. This is one thing we can work with the.
I just got on this subject.
Well, oh, you want to wait a while? Ms. Miranda?
The sooner the better.
Thank you. Mr. First?
Acting sooner enables more options of a less drastic nature and allows changes to be phased in gradually. The 113th Congress should act to implement sustainable solvency. So I'll give you to the end of next year.
How about the end of this year?
That would be.
We're working on it. Let me tell you, Mr. Becerra and I have been working on it a long time together, and I think I agree with you, Mr. Sterling.
Mr. Chairman, it's yesterday. Every year we wait, we put more and more of the burden on the young, and we who are a little bit older bear less and less of the burden, and that's simply unfair.
Yeah, I know. You and I are worried about it, aren't we?
Yes, I think you and I should pay. I mean, it's hard to just, everybody keeps saying we shouldn't pay any of the cost, but in point of fact, I think we should bear some of it too.
You know, in your testimony, Mr. Sterling, you say Social Security was designed for a different era. I agree. What are the impacts of putting close to a third of all adults on Social Security and the impact of current law retirement age on workers, beneficiaries, and the economy?
Well, it simply means with a smaller work base to support the system, no matter what tax rate we agree upon, whether it's a higher rate or a lower rate, with fewer workers, we've got less money coming in the system. So in point of fact, although we're talking about benefit adjustments today, to the extent we can encourage more work through changes in the retirement age, through adjustments, backloading the system so a few more benefits are paid in old age, if we encourage work, we get more revenues at any tax rate. And by the way, I should comment at the same time that given that our economy is now in a state of still high unemployment, we should really be looking at the non-employment rate. And one of the major factors on the non-employment rate is the encouragement of older people to retire.
Well, thank you for your comments, all of you. I appreciate your testimony. Is Javier coming back?
He is coming back eventually, but he has a conflicting meeting.
Yeah, okay. Then, Mr. Doggett, I'm going to recognize you for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you very much. Dr. Sterling, I understand your testimony to be that whatever the committee might recommend on revenue changes, there must be some benefit changes. Is the converse also true? Because I understood that to be Mr. Hoagland's findings of the Bipartisan Policy Committee and also on the Bowles-Simpson, that it is impossible to resolve this problem equitably unless there are additional revenues.
Well, personally, I do support additional revenues for the system. I do have a problem, however, which goes beyond the Social Security issue, is that for the most part, if I'm going to raise additional revenues, particularly if I'm going to raise additional revenues on higher income people, I don't want that money to keep going for these elderly programs. Let's say they're absorbing all the growth in government. So I have this dilemma. While I think revenues is part of our broader budgetary issues, I don't know that I want to keep devoting additional taxes and revenues to supporting elderly programs at the cost of programs for younger people. So I therefore confine the extent to which I would have tax increases in Social Security, which is not the same thing as the extent to which I would confine tax increases outside of Social Security.
All right, so you're basically agreeing with the Simpson-Bowles and the bipartisan policy recommendations that we will not get our national debt in shape unless we have some additional revenues to go along with this, but you don't necessarily support additional revenues for Social Security specifically?
I do support some additional revenue to Social Security. Actually, like their commissions, I would bump up the taxable maximum back up to approximately 90% of wages. So I do actually support that type of change.
I got the impression from your testimony that to some extent looking at Social Security changes is an all or nothing proposition, that there has to be broad, comprehensive change along the lines of your policy objectives. Not doing it a single item at a time, such as cost of living or retirement age. Is that your position?
Yes, Mr. Doggett. Let me give you an example with the retirement age. The simple fact that we all get now about, say, 6 more years of benefits than, that's actually, we take about 11 or 12 because we retire earlier, but if we didn't retire earlier, we get about 6 or 7 more years of benefits. That's inured mainly to the benefit of higher income people. Because we get a higher benefit to begin with, and in fact, if I don't live to 62, I don't get anything out of all those additional years of benefits, and if I'm disabled, I don't get anything. So most of the benefits from not indexing the retirement age over its history has inured to the benefit of higher income people. So if you cut back on that, we still have to worry about other distributional effects, you know, for as I say, for people who are disabled, for people who don't make it to 62, for people who have trouble working, we have to worry about that. But not adjusting the retirement age is like throwing the money off the roof in a poor area of the city and hoping some of the poor get it. It's just not very target effective. So yes, I would increase the retirement age, and then I would try to come back in through other provisions like minimum benefits and other things to make a system that, in my view, should be more progressive than it was. I think the system is less progressive than people think it is because it has a lot of regressive features that people didn't pay attention to in the beginning. And so my goal is to make the system more progressive, better at the bottom, say the bottom half of the distribution, recognizing that because it's out of balance, people at the top are either going to have to take benefit cuts or tax increases, one or the other, to pay for it.
Ms. Miranda, what do you think the effect of the changes you've heard the other witnesses testify that they feel must be made in Social Security will have on working families? The changes that you've heard recommended, they have indicated they want to compensate for some of those changes with other adjustments, and that the current program, they believe, does not adequately address the needs of poorer retirees. What's your reaction to their recommendations?
Well, we agree that the system does not provide adequate benefits for low-income retirees and others. However, and we are very much in favor of a lot of the ideas to improve benefits for the low income. However, these ideas are often coupled with a benefit cut, so there's no net improvement for low income. I did the math for Hispanic men and women. Hispanic women have the lowest average Social Security benefit for any gender or race or ethnicity, so their average benefit is below the poverty line. It's $10,438. And I did do the math on the change CPI plus the age bump up, and it's still a loss. It's still about a 1.5% loss to these low-income women already. So there's no net gain from doing it if you couple it with a benefit cut. So we're in favor of things like the bump up for the age, but we are not in favor of it being coupled with a cut. So we like some of those ideas. However, I would like to say with the special minimum benefit, I've also looked into it, including at Dr. Sturley's research from the Urban Institute, and you see that low-income people, the lowest income people, have the shortest career histories in covered earnings. So something like 80 to 95% of low-income workers would not meet the requirements to get the full special minimum benefit. That the requirement is 30 years in covered earnings. And only something like 3 to, at the most, 20% of low-income workers would meet that requirement. So you're excluding almost everybody. It's practically the null set. So I don't know. I mean, every proposal seems to have that in there, and it doesn't do much good.
We've already heard your testimony, and his time has expired.
Oh, sorry.
That's all right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lloyd. Mr. Renacci, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank all the witnesses and thank you for all your testimony. It's interesting because prior to coming to Congress, I was a CPA and was brought into businesses in many cases that were failing. And when you looked at their failures, it was many times the owners would say, well, you know, we were doing fine and we shouldn't touch anything and we shouldn't have done anything. And what they really ignored was the trend and the future. And so I'm appreciative that we're looking at the trends in the future here, because that's the key. We can sit and just bury our head, but the trends are showing that we've got some problems. Mr. Stero, you made a comment where either there's two sides. You're either for the box or against the box. It's kind of interesting because I would agree that some people, when you say something, they say you're against the box, you're for the box. So I think everybody up here is for making sure Social Security is solvent for the future. I know as a father of 3 children, I want to make sure that the benefits are available to them too. So when I look at things, I try and look at systemic issues. And I'd like to ask, in reading your testimony, I see a couple things that have been brought out of your testimonies, especially several of you. The system does not encourage savings, our current system. And the other thing is the system encourages retirement before the national retirement age. Those seem to be 2 real systemic problems within the current system, which aren't benefits, aren't revenue raisers, aren't any of those. These are actual systemic problems that, I'd like Mr. Sterl, Mr. Fichtner, if you could address, what are some of the ways Congress and even the Social Security Administration can incentivize savings, and also we can encourage older Americans to remain in the workforce? So I'd start with Mr. Sterl.
I have a number of suggestions in my testimony. I won't go to all the details, but the basic suggestions are to bump up the retirement age. It actually turns out that I would also increase the early retirement age, because it actually turns out that the people who are hurt the worst are the lower income people who can work but don't. That is, their proportional loss in income over their retirement is actually worse than it is for higher income people who might have capital income on the side. And then, as I say, I would try to then make a lot of other adjustments to make sure that that net change is more progressive. I would try to backload benefits more. That is, to the extent that we can make it more of an old age system rather than a system that's really a middle age retirement system. That's going to encourage work by not providing so much in the way of benefits up front. I would also offer people partial retirement options that Social Security doesn't offer, so that people don't have to think it's an all or nothing choice, which many of them do. On the savings front, I've suggested a number of times that we follow Britain's example when they did Social Security reform, and we back up Social Security reform with a private pension reform that's aimed, by the way, at providing substantial coverage for the vast majority of people who get very little in private retirement benefits.
Before I move to Mr. Fichtner, I would just ask you this question. Instead of raising the rate, raising the age, shouldn't we, how about changing the system so people, I have friends back home that are retiring because it makes no sense for them that they if they work longer, they don't get any additional benefit, and at the same time, there's no incentive to continue to work because they get their retirement benefits cut if they do, and they can't work and get those benefits.
The current system has something called an earnings test, which technically doesn't reduce benefits, but people think of it as a huge tax rate on their benefits, because technically what happens when those benefits get reduced, Social Security gives them an actuarial adjustment for higher benefits later. I want to make that explicit. They recognize by working longer that they could make that work to their advantage in a much more explicit way. But also the suggestion I made, and I think Mr. Fichtner made, to actually drop this notion of only counting 35 years of work means if I work more than 35 years, I work past 62, that can also add to my benefits. So I'd make a number of adjustments along those lines.
Mr. Fichtner.
Thank you for the question, Congressman. I realize your time is short, so I will second everything that Dr. Sterling said, and then to sort of add what can the Social Security Administration do to help encourage people to maybe delay claiming, because those who take early retirement basically are behind, and their monthly benefit is lower than they would otherwise be. And when they get into their 80s or 90s, then behind for the rest of their lives. Part of this is better financial literacy, with both the commission plans actually endorse, which would be to show the benefits and the risks and costs of claiming early versus claiming later. And I think we should look at raising the early retirement age. Right now, as we said, 40% take it at 62, 70% are taking it before the normal retirement age. That means that is actually increasing poverty in older ages. If we increased it but did like a hardship benefit or a special minimum benefit bump up, that would keep lower people out of poverty but still give the incentive for those to continue work.
Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. T-Berry, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you all. Great testimony. I got to tell you, this should be easier to get done than it is after listening to you all. But let me tell you just a couple stories. I was at a senior center in my district 10 years ago. I was supposed to give a congressional update, and there were seniors there from 62 to in the 90s. And before I could even get a word out about my congressional update, this lady in the back of the room wanted to know where I was on the Bush privatization of Social Security. And our answer to it was, well, there's not a piece of legislation yet, but we have to fix Social Security. Maybe not for you all, but for your kids and certainly your grandkids. Another lady said, my grandkids are spoiled. Don't touch Social Security because I paid into it just like I paid into Medicare. I have noticed over the last 10 years, and I think it has to do with organizations like yours and yours, that seniors are tending to understand more that they didn't pay into Medicare every benefit they're getting out. That's been a real struggle, by the way, a real struggle. So I think education is the key, and you talked about the progressivity, dead on, but the lack of education, even among some members, is striking to me. I mean, I have a senior population who still believes that we should fix the notch years, right? The notch years. And I try to tell them, you got a better deal than my dad, who's going to be 80. And my dad retired at 65. Maybe I should be mad that somebody here changed the retirement age and requires me to retire at 67. But I got to tell you, my sister, who's in her 30s, doesn't even think that even matters because she doesn't believe she's going to get Social Security. And to say, and some in this town say, well, this isn't a problem, they should go look at their Social Security benefit package if they're under 50. Here's my question to you. How do we get just members of Congress to understand the severity of the problem and the system? Because I think you're absolutely right, Mr. Sturley, and Mr. First, you were on the same page. We can't fix these systems that benefit us if we get there by raising more revenue to put into those systems, because it is tragic what we're doing to little girls and little boys who are trying to get an education. My parents were immigrants. They never had great jobs. They're now concerned about their grandkids. So this shouldn't be about CEOs and NBA basketball players and them paying their fair share. This should be about fundamentally fixing two vitally important programs for the future. And you've all made some really great suggestions, but the politics of this aren't quite there yet. Mr. Lorenzen.
I would say a couple of things. First, I think it is important to talk not only about the importance that those programs are strong for future generations, for future children and my soon-to-be-born child, but also to talk about what it means for the resources for other priorities that Dr. Sturley was talking about, that if tax revenues are going to those programs, those are tax revenues that are not available for other priorities. And I think that's an equally important point to remind people. And then I would just use this opportunity to make a shameless plug. The Committee for Responsible Federal Budget, which hosts the Moment of Truth Project, will be coming out shortly with the Reformer, which will be an interactive online tool that will allow people to look at the different options for changing benefits and revenues, and you'll see what it means over 75 years and the period, and so people can see the choices and trade-offs.
And let me tell you why that's important. I had a debate with a smart guy who argued with me that taking it at 62 was better because life expectancy is longer now than waiting. And so there are smart people who do that. But I got to tell you, in this town, if I say I am for fixing Social Security and Medicare, somebody might say, well, someone has said, well, it's because you want to do that. You want to cut benefits. You want to hurt the program. Let me tell you, I mean, I'd like to cut the retirement age to 55. As a selfish person, that's not what this is about. I don't want to cut anybody's benefits. I want to make sure that people who like my mom and dad, who depend on this program, get it, and that we don't rob future generations to get there. So, Mr. Sturley, any final comments on the politics of this?
I don't know what else we can do here. I mean, I'm actually admire every person at this table. We all work on trying to give you data you can use. If you look, for instance, at the last graph in my testimony, that's the one I use when people want to argue the trust fund balances, because it basically shows that when you get to about 2035, we're going to be paying maybe 30% more than we've got in the way of revenues. So regardless of what you think about the trust funds, show them that type of data. I do lifetime value of benefits and taxes. I keep pointing out that the package of benefits in Social Security and Medicare is now approaching $1 million. When I say that to people, they don't say, gee, it's got to be higher. Once they know the real numbers. And then finally on the retirement age, one I'd strongly suggest, and Mr. Lorenz and I have talked about this, in their commission they debated how to announce it in terms of the increase in the retirement age. This is the normal retirement age, but if you look at their package, they actually keep giving more and more years, which I would not do, by the way. They keep giving more and more years of benefits to people as they live longer, just less than they get now. If you go to the public and say, should it be a priority, Social Security, to continually provide more years of benefits to people, or should we have other priorities? They'll usually they won't accept that as an option. And yet that's the system we have.
Thank you.
So that's different than saying you're increasing the retirement age.
Thank you.
I want to thank each of you for being here, and we appreciate your testimony. We've got votes on the floor, and I don't want to try to hold you during that time because we can't come back. We're adjourning today for Memorial Day. How about that? So I want to thank each and every one of you for being here, and thank our panel for their questions, and thank you, Lloyd. So we will stand adjourned.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.